This is Mark. I'm with Ben Franklin Community Gardens, and we're going to talk today about how to disassemble your garden at the end of the year. So at the end of each year, it's going to be important that you disassemble your garden appropriately so that you can be checked out at the end of the year and then receive an application for the following year. Now, as you can see with my garden here, I haven't got started on disassembling it yet, but one of the important things is going to be to take out all of the hard material that's in your garden. So anything that you've brought in that's not organic needs to be removed. So in my case, I have my cages, which are for my tomatoes. I have the stakes that I've planted in the ground. And I've got the cages on some of the other plants too. So it's going to be important that you remove all those and take those out. I have also another little structure here that I built for containing my hoses. So if you have a hose, if you have anything that a hose is attached to, that all has to come out too. Now, if there's any other kind of debris that you have in your garden, that's going to be important also to take out, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. So the other thing that's important to do, so these are, when you have a viney plant, it's important that you cut the vines down to 2 feet or less. In the case of the sweet potatoes, you can see these vines can get to be pretty long. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut it at 2 feet all the way down till you get to the plant itself. And then you can put that in the garden and it will then get rototilled back in. Now, if for some reason you're going to tear down and put your products into the compost bins, you also want to cut those down so that those will decompose. Also, like in the case of my tomatoes, some of my tomatoes are 5 to 6 feet tall. So in those cases, I'm also going to chop those down a little bit so that there's less material that has to be then ground up and at the end of the year. So this is an example of one of the things that would need to be removed. This is a tomato cage. They come in various sizes, smaller sizes, larger sizes. So this is one of the hard materials that definitely would have to be removed from the garden. Any of these materials have to be removed because at the end of the year, we do brush hog the garden, and then we're going to do a light till and put cover crops in. Obviously, an item like this would get caught in the garden, in the tractor, and completely kind of destroy the brush hog that we have. So any of those larger materials like that are essential to be taken out of the garden. Now, one of the other important things to do when you're disassembling your garden is to make sure that all of your mounds are raked out. That way the tractor again can go over the garden smoothly. Now, where I was at before, you saw my sweet potatoes, you couldn't see the fact that it's a giant mound that's underneath all those vines, and those would need to be raked out. Here's an example right here. Also, I have 2 mounds that I used for my squash. And you really can't even see them that well now because they were kind of covered by the weeds and things around it. But it is important to know that this is where you had your mounds, and it is important to make sure that you rake them out. And so basically, all you need to do is you just need to use your rake, and you just need to take the mound and level it out as best as possible. And again, that way, when the brush hog goes through, it's going to be able to get to all the material a lot easier, and it's not going to get caught up on any of the mounds that are in the garden. So again, this is a very important part when you're dismantling the garden, to make sure that you have all of your mounds leveled out.
So here's a pile of sweet potato slips that were already cut up into the 2-foot sections. You want to make sure that once your sweet potatoes are cut up that you're going to spread them out throughout your garden, so this way they're not in one big pile. This helps with them decomposing. It also helps when the tractor comes around that they're not running over a big hump. So a couple of the common things that are found inside the garden, as Mark mentioned, was the tags. A lot of people use these and they put them next to their plants so they can identify their plants throughout the season. Make sure that when you check out that each one of these are pulled out of your garden. What happens is when they're left in the garden, when the tractor runs them over, they end up being broken up into tiny pieces. And then we end up finding them throughout the season. I'm sure many people have already found some of these when they came into their garden and sifted through their dirt. They found broken pieces. A couple other things, the stakes. This is just one example of a stake. These stakes are used when you use the ground cover, and people will stick these in. A lot of times people forget about these, and we'll find a whole bunch of these coming into the new season as well. The tractor also runs these over and breaks these up. We end up with plastic pieces. Last thing is one of the common things is the plant container. A lot of these sometimes will be left in the gardens, and they also will be run over, and we'll find plastic pieces in the spring as well once we get the tractor through here. So a common thing that people put down is ground cover to prevent weeds. Some individuals, what they'll do is they'll put grass on or they'll put straw on. This particular person actually put straw on top of her ground cover. One of the things that you'll have to do in order to check out is you will have to make sure that you remove your straw and then pull up all your ground cover. So we don't want to leave any of that left. What happens is the tractor comes in and it will tear it up and it gets stuck into the plow, and then the coordinator has to go out and pull out the sheets of the fabric. So one of the common questions is individuals use the newspaper and the straw and put it down for a weed barrier. Many people ask if you have to pick it up. So right here's an example of the newspaper and straw. This can stay in. This actually would decompose throughout the season and will just go right back into the ground. So right here is a perfect example of where we have the cardboard. This individual used the cardboard and then they put the straw on the top. So the cardboard would be removed in order to be able to check out for the season. Cardboard doesn't decompose like the newspaper does.
Okay, a couple of the points we want to talk about here is when you do deconstruct your garden, it actually is good to take the material that you have taken out, like tomato plants and all those other kind of things, and just kind of spread them on the ground. In this situation here, you can see the ground's pretty bare. That organic material that we actually that we do cut up goes back into the ground, so it actually nourishes the ground. So you don't need to put it into the compost bin when you're doing that. You actually can cut it up, unless it's a diseased material. If it is something that is diseased, then that is going to actually be pulled out of the garden altogether, not put in the compost pile, not put into your garden. And there's one other thing, that sometimes when you are using paper and straw, you may end up with a bale of straw or part of a bale of straw left. And if you do that, make sure that you open the bale up and spread the bale of straw out. It's okay to have the straw spread out throughout the garden, but it's not okay to leave it in the bale, of course, obviously, again, because that's not something that the tractor can go over and then grind up into the soil. Plus you have the string that's on there, and that string is very strong, and it will get caught up in the tines of the tractor. So again, make sure that you spread out any materials that you have, but especially things like bales of straw. If you do have anything that looks like a diseased plant, we would like you to take it out. So sometimes it's not always the easiest to tell, but you know, if you have those yellow beetles on there, or if you see that the leaves of your plant have all been eaten up, there's a good chance that it did have some disease. Now, like a lot of tomato plants, you're going to see that those there's been they've turned brown, but that's pretty natural for tomato plants, so that's not the kind of thing that you would have to remove. But again, if you have other plants that look pretty much like they may be diseased, it's important that you bag those up and just take them out of the garden altogether. That's not something that we would dispose of as a garden, and throughout the year we won't be disposing of those kind of materials. So it is important that you do put those kind of things in a trash bag, take them out, and then put them into your own trash. One of the final things that you'll be doing here is you are going to be checking out. You will be meeting with a member of the committee, and they will go through your garden plot with you to make sure that you've been able to take out all the materials that were in your garden so that it can be plowed appropriately. And by doing that, you'll be able to then come back next year. Now there's a list that'll be on there that we'll be using that'll be standard for all gardeners. So make sure that you do meet with a member of the committee. There will be a chart up that will show when a committee member will be here. So if they don't happen to be here at the time you're up here, just make sure that you do come back at one of those allotted times to make sure that you've met with them and made sure that everything is out and everything's done appropriately in your garden. Now on that list will also be the volunteer hours. And so make sure that you listed the volunteer hours that you have earned while you've been in here. And you can bring those up and those can be seen, or you can let the committee member know exactly what you have done to earn your garden hours. It's okay to have more than 5. So if you spend a lot of time in the garden volunteering, it's really important because we use those volunteer hours to help us get grants. So if you've had more than 5, that's great. Let us know how many that you had and let us know the activity that you did to earn it. At the end of the year, if you were not able to do volunteer time, you can pay for your volunteer hours. So for each hour that you did not fulfill, it's a $10 donation for that hour. So that would be $10 and there's 5 hours required. So that would be, for each hour, it would be $10 donation for that time. And if you do all of this, then you will be able to be checked out appropriately and you'll be able to be invited back. You will be invited back next year to the garden. And we thank you for your cooperation in advance.